Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel. So it's been a little while since I did anything horror related on the channel, so this is perhaps a long overdue video, particularly as this is a follow-on video to my top 10 horror films of the 2010s video that I did in the summer of last year. So now this is going to be my top 10 horror films of the 2000s. An interesting decade for horror because I think we got a lot of variety in the 2000s. I mean, I can think of a lot of spoof style horror. We got a lot of found footage horror, which became extremely popular in the 2000s, I think, particularly in the follow-up to the Blair Witch Project. The birth of much more extreme horror films as well, where, you got sort of a lot more torture-based horror, which the first films that come to mind that really gave that sort of scene a bit of an explosion were the Saw films, of course, and the Saw franchise, which is still very popular today. And there is a Saw film on this list, but I'm not yet going to reveal, obviously, which Saw film that is ahead of starting my top 10 list. So yeah, I mean, I'd stress that this list isn't a particularly serious list. So if you're looking for a list of 10 critically acclaimed horror films, you're probably in the wrong place, because a few of these aren't that great, to be honest, but they're films I've found find still really entertaining, and I'm likely to go back to fairly regularly as well. I do quite enjoy all of these films, otherwise they wouldn't be here in the top 10. So been looking forward to doing this, and yep, it's been a long time coming. So at number 10, I've chosen The Skeleton Key from 2005, which stars Kate Hudson, the late great John Hurt, and Gina Rowlands as well. And the strength from this film, I think, comes, it's a very slow burn. You have to be the patient type, I think, probably to enjoy The Skeleton Key. It's certainly not one of the kind of more shocking horror films of the 2000s. It's much more mundane certainly in that respect. Very, very light, more supernatural based horror elements in this one. But where the film, as I say, where it draws its strength is actually some pretty solid performances from Kate Hudson and Gina Rowlands in particular in this film. And its slowly unravelling story is quite interesting, and I think enough to tease you as a viewer, to keep you interested if you like this style of more mystery-based horror with the kind of supernatural elements added in. So I quite enjoyed The Skeleton Key. That comes in at number 10. Number 9 is Silent Hill, a film that I did do a video dedicated to, actually, both Silent Hill films. I'm not a big fan of the second film, I'll admit, but I do kind of like the first film, and even though pales in comparison to the games, to be honest. I mean, Silent Hill 2, the game, is possibly my all-time favourite video game, right? Absolutely superb game, which I kind of have a lot of nostalgia value for. And so, sure, this isn't necessarily a great film, I don't think, but it does do quite a few things right, in my humble opinion. I do like the atmosphere. I think it gets some of the atmospheric stuff right for the Silent Hill, for this film and the adaptation. Some great scenes as well, and the bulk of I'd say the first half in particular, and the bulk of the film is actually pretty good. And, there's enough characterization and enough going on that you do kind of follow it most of the way through. I mean, I think it's only kind of towards the end where I personally lost a little bit of interest in the film, but for some reason, and it may be that, I no longer own the games. In fact, it's been a long time since I really played video games much at all. And perhaps that's part of the nostalgia value of this film for me, because it does remind me a little bit of the games, even though the games to me are like absolutely brilliant. But there's something about this film keeps drawing me back. Comes in at number 9. Number 8 is Drag Me to Hell from 2009. A film I actually saw relatively recently, and I think its best scenes certainly star Mrs. Gernouche, one of the kind of sort of vengeful witch character in this film. And it's a very exciting, really gripping film, lots of great sequences, and good performances all round, including, of course, got to get her name right, Alison Lohman. And the ending as well was a really good, I just thought it was a really good finish to the film. A little bit unexpected, maybe, from my point of view. I don't know, maybe it was a little predictable in retrospect, but I really liked the way it was done, and there's a lot to like in Drag Me to Hell. Again, not a perfect film, but there's a lot to enjoy from it, and that comes in at number 8. Now, number 7, here we go. Now, I did mention the Saw franchise at the beginning of the video, and this is Saw 2, the second film. Bit torn because I do like Saw 1 an awful lot as well of the franchise. For me, after this second film, it goes a bit astray and gets much more focused on the traps instead of the more psychological and more, I thought Saw 2 at least had some interesting characters for me, that were a little bit more, sure, they weren't exactly likable characters, most of them, but it had a bit more of an interesting set piece as well, with the house and as we kind of discovered more about the different characters was interesting too, and the way those were teased throughout the film. Definitely for me, one of the more exciting entries as well, and it's not just a lot of the late Saw films for me just felt very trap focused, whereas this still retains something of the mystique and psychological aspect of the earlier films. So that's Saw 2, number 7. Number 6 is definitely one of my favourite, and actually I think this is genuinely also a very, very good film and a bit underrated. It's the Spanish film Rec from 2007. And this is one of those slightly found footage, I think it's kind of found footage style for the most part. Really well, really pretty good performances for that sort of style of film as well. I think it was pretty low budget. It gets the shocking moments done. I think the shocks are done brilliantly in this film. They really are. You're not expecting them when they happen. Highly recommend it. Real thrill ride. Doesn't outstay its welcome, and is, as I say, is actually quality-wise I also think pretty good as well. Where are we up to now? Number 5, which is 28 Days Later from 2002. This British horror film, a Danny Boyle directed film. Really, really excellent film, which I think was the inspiration for a lot of the horror films and TV series that came after it, both in the style of how it was done, in the sort of more human-focused elements of an apocalyptic story. And of course, I think a lot of The Walking Dead and how that is, and how it feels at times like you can sense that you wonder how much it might have been inspired. I don't know, but it feels like it may have drawn some inspiration from 28 Days Later. Stars, of course, Cillian Murphy, I think, and is, as I say, it's one of the more intriguing horror films, I think, from the 2000s, and just well directed. Lots of interesting kind of camera angles and suspenseful moments, and also the more sort of disturbing moments of the film is also pretty well delivered too. And that's 28 Days Later from 2002, coming in at number 5. Number 4 is a Japanese Tartan Asia Extreme film called Dark Water, and you may know this film, or you may possibly more likely know the remake that there was, I think, in 2005. The remake, I'm not totally sure. I think it was the American version, but this is the version. I haven't actually seen the remake. Funny, I've only seen this film, but I don't feel like, unless you really recommend this in the comments, that I watch the other version, then fine, I might check it out. But I really like this version, it's the original, the Japanese one. It's just, it's got that atmosphere. And I was talking a bit about Silent Hill because I love the atmosphere of the Silent Hill video games, and there's something similar in the atmosphere of this film to that. It's just this sort of creepy, but at the strange time, kind of weirdly serene kind of an atmosphere. I can't describe it quite well enough here, maybe, but there's something strangely both quite creepy and yet, serene about the feel of the film, the music and the eeriness of it. It's very odd, but really, really suits everything about the film, the story, the the mother and daughter relationship is certainly a drawing point for me of this film as well, in the sense that you get quite emotionally involved as well, and worried. I think you sort of got the mother's concern for her daughter carrying a lot of the basis, I think, for the film and the weight of the characters as the film gradually unfolds. Really good film. Dark Water, number 4. Shouldn't be losing count at the top 10, really. There we go. Number 3 is The Mist from 2007, the Stephen King adaptation. What a fantastic film. I mean, I kind of want to call this a cult classic, but I think it's so popular now that perhaps it's more than just a cult classic. The ending of this is pretty, is a lot of what a lot of people talk about, but for me, it's the way that the people sort of handle each other in that kind of threatening situation, and how fear and hate become the drivers of how people deal with, the pretty terrifying situation that's going on around them. And in a way, this was kind of not so far off. I mean, put the monsters to one side perhaps, but with what's happened with the pandemic at times, it's perhaps not so far-fetched in the way some of the people in the film react to the terrors of what lies outside that supermarket. Absolutely, and by Frank Darabont, who went on to direct the first 2 seasons of Walking Dead. I've got my facts right there. And lots of the cast of The Walking Dead also appear in this film, like Carol. I've got to think a bit about who else appears in this one as well. I think I know Carol does, and now my mind's gone blank as to who else appears in it. But anyway, great film, excellent ending, and one of my absolute favourites from the 2000s, without a shadow of a doubt. Next up is Swedish film. Again, one which I think has had an American version too. This is Let the Right One In. This is my number 2 pick. Really quite an endearing horror film, which for me is as much about the relationship of these 2 children who both have very adverse circumstances. And the film, I think, is as much about how their relationship is built, and how they sort of stand up for each other, and really build that relationship and make it really strong. The film feels as much a character film than it does really sort of any kind of horror. There are pretty strong horror elements in it as well, so it probably doesn't disappoint on that front either. And it is pretty stunning. I mean, out of all these films on my list, arguably this is the one that is most critically well received, and it is brilliant. Lastly, my number 1 pick, and I think if you are a long-time sub of the channel, you might remember I did a video dedicated to both of these films, but it's the first one, as usual, the original, right? That's the best. And this is The Descent by Neil Marshall. Yes, he also did Dog Soldiers. And The Descent for me is something of a horror masterpiece, and it's just my favourite because I think it has all the ingredients that make a horror film good, and the ingredients are essentially cooked together and done perfectly in a way. The performances are pretty convincing. I think there's a realism to the whole story, particularly the way it starts and introduces characters and their backstories. There is also, the monsters are pretty terrifying, actually, I think, as well, and the deaths are pretty horrifying as well, I think, and well done by the production team and everything in this film. And the actresses, excellent too. I mean, it just has all the elements, I think, that do make horror good. And as a modern horror film, as modern horror goes, it's one of the best I've seen in memory, in recent memory, I would say, although 2005 now was 17 years ago, so it's not that recent a film. But yeah, it even says on the back of the DVD, the most significant Britula since another film on my list, 28 Days Later. So that's it. That's my top 10 horror films of the 2000s. What would your top 10 be from this decade? Or just drop any of your favourites in the comments, ones that I have probably missed out. I'm sure I've missed out quite a few. Maybe ones that I haven't actually seen, so that might be why they're not yet on this particular list. Otherwise, from me, as always, take care, everyone. And until next time, bye for now.